Can the Los Angeles Lakers once again become championship contenders next season? After the Lakers struggled to contend in 2 consecutive seasons, many are wondering whether the Lakers could ever get back to that level again. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. When the Lakers originally acquired LeBron James, the expectation was always championship or bust. And after the Lakers acquired Anthony Davis to put alongside LeBron and won the NBA championship during the 2020 NBA bubble, a lot of fans were very excited about the future of the Lakers. But unfortunately for the Lakers, ever since that championship win, they've struggled tremendously. In the 2021 NBA season, they were only the 7th seed in the Western Conference, mostly due to injuries, but nonetheless, it was a failure that year as they did lose in the first round. And this previous season they were the 11th seed in the Western Conference after acquiring Russell Westbrook, who at the time of the trade was seen as a potential third star, or at the very least that potential third scoring threat that could help out guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron James. But obviously thus far that hasn't panned out yet either. So at this point, with LeBron getting up there in age and not getting younger, people are wondering if the Lakers can ever compete for a championship ever again with LeBron on this team as currently constructed. Now, whenever you have LeBron James on your team, you always have a chance to compete for an NBA championship. Now, whether that means you actually will or not is going to come down to a bunch of different factors, but starting out with LeBron is definitely a huge step in the right direction. But if the Lakers actually want to compete for an NBA championship this upcoming season, they're going to need to do a couple different things. And starting with the first thing, they need to stay healthy. One of the biggest issues for the Lakers last season, and even 2 years ago especially, was the fact that both LeBron James and Anthony Davis were just not all that healthy during the regular season, and especially once it came down to the playoffs. Now, one way to combat those injury issues to guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron would be to give them some rest days during the regular season, which is definitely something the Lakers should look at. But if the Lakers are a 7th, 8th, 9th, or maybe even 10th seed in the Western Conference, it's going to be very difficult to give your main players days off because you have to win every single game just to make it to the playoffs. But if the Lakers were able to have a really good regular season where they would be a top 5 or a top 4 seed in the Western Conference even, at that point it's much easier to give your main 2 guys days off. So in my opinion, it's going to be pretty important for a team like the Lakers to get off to a pretty good start early on, just to give themselves some breathing room, just to have the ability to give your main guys some rest days. Now obviously it's not 100% successful. Even if you give your main players days off, it doesn't mean that they're not going to get hurt throughout the season or even in the playoffs, but it's just something that would help, especially when you consider a guy like Anthony Davis has been pretty injury prone as of late. Now, the next thing that the Lakers need to work on in order to get back to that championship contention would be to figure out what's going on with Russell Westbrook. Now, if you want to keep Russell Westbrook on your team, I guess you can, and they're probably going to have a better season than last year with that added year of experience. But at this point, I just don't personally think Westbrook fits in with the Lakers. Regardless of how he plays individually at this point, I just think him and LeBron James are not a good fit at all, because LeBron needs to have the ball in his hands, Westbrook needs to have the ball in his hands, and out of those 2 guys, obviously LeBron is far superior, so he's going to have the ball in his hands most of the time. So if Westbrook's just a guy who's going to play off ball for you, he's not going to be all that effective, as he can't shoot the catch and shoot 3-point jump shot basically at all. And you could definitely say just have Westbrook come off the bench and have the ball in his hands at all times when he is playing with that bench unit. But at the same time, would a guy like Westbrook be okay with coming off the bench? And even if that were to be true, he wouldn't be able to play clutch time minutes, or he really shouldn't play clutch time minutes, because him and LeBron just don't fit in well whatsoever, stylistically. And overall, even though I do think if the Lakers were to keep Westbrook, they'll probably be better than last season, that isn't really saying much, as they were a complete disaster last year. So in my opinion, even though it is going to be very difficult to do, I think the Lakers need to find a way to trade away Russell Westbrook, even if they really get nothing in return. Just to get rid of him is probably probably going to be a net positive for them. And although Westbrook has obviously not been playing good basketball as of late, I'm not necessarily saying I think he's a complete trash can and he has no place in the NBA at this point. I definitely think he does. I just think on this Lakers team with LeBron, it doesn't make much sense. Now, the next factor that would determine whether the Lakers are indeed a championship contender this next season or not would be whether the Lakers are able to get more depth on the roster. Now, when you look at their team currently, they definitely have some nice players besides their star guys in LeBron and Anthony Davis, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have a very deep team. And obviously having depth is always important for any team, but especially when you talk about a team like the Lakers that have their main two guys that are somewhat injury prone, it's definitely even more important in that case. And if the Lakers were to add a couple other starting level guys or even just supplementary guys to this roster, I definitely think it would benefit them tremendously. And even if their star guys were to go down with an injury for a week or a few days during the regular season, that depth that they did have would be able to keep them afloat for that time being. But at this point, currently looking at the Lakers roster, if LeBron James were to go out for a week or so, or if Anthony Davis were to go out for a week or so, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for the Lakers to stay afloat. Yeah, maybe a guy like LeBron could hold them over for a couple games, but eventually it's going to become too much. The Lakers just don't have enough depth around those main two guys at this point. Now, obviously, it's going to be extremely difficult to get that depth on this roster at this point, now that free agency is basically over. So I guess the only possible way the Lakers could do this would be to make a bunch of different trades, which is also probably going to be very difficult as they don't really have all that many draft picks coming up as well, and they don't have all that many players to actually trade on this roster at this point. Maybe something they do is they just keep the roster as is for now until the trade deadline and then be pretty aggressive then. But even at that point, I just don't see how they're going to make these trades. Maybe they wait until the buyout market and see if they can get aggressive and get somewhat lucky at that point. But at this point, it's definitely a very difficult situation, but it's a situation that the Lakers really need to figure out if they truly want to compete for an NBA championship this year. Now, obviously, there's also some other factors that will play in, like coaching, how well their younger guys do develop from this year compared to last. But at the end of the day, I think the main two factors in determining whether the Lakers will be back in championship contention or not this next season is A, health. That's probably the most important thing, but also B, what ends up happening with Russell Westbrook. And if they're able to trade him, I think they will be better off overall. But overall, if I had to give my opinion at this point, I would say I think the Lakers are going to be better than last year. I think that's pretty clear. I do also think they're going to make the playoffs this season, but it's very hard for me to see the Lakers being championship contenders once again, or at the very least legitimate championship contenders. I just think there's too many really good teams in the Western Conference that are going to give the Lakers a ton of problems, and even if they did make it to the finals, I think teams out of the East are also going to give the Lakers a ton of problems as well. And at this point, there's just too much that needs to be done. But obviously, whenever you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis on your team, anything is possible. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Lakers could potentially be a championship contender this season, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.